Welcome to Study Abroad, Smart and Simple, brought to you by ApplyWave.com.
Welcome, students, to ApplyWave.com Study Abroad Tips, Smart and Simple. I am here with Mackenzie, Lisa, and Lena from ApplyWave. Hello, ladies. How are you all doing today?
We're doing great, James. Thanks for having us back.
All right, and we welcome Lena from ApplyWave. Lena, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Lena. In ApplyWave, I'm responsible of enrollment of students. So anything that has to do with students, applications, I take care of all of that. And I'm so glad to be here today on the podcast. Thanks, James.
Yeah, and you are based in Canada, correct?
Yes, I'm currently in Toronto.
Fantastic. All right. So do you have any updates on COVID-19 in Toronto, Canada? What's going on?
Actually, we're slowly reopening. So we have phases. So phase 1, phase 2. Right now, actually, just today, we started phase 2, which is opening up salons, nail salons, hair salons. Some childcare services are opening up. I know there's a big mall downtown that's opening up. Not all the stores are opening up. Everyone's still taking precautions, keeping a safe distance. But slowly we're opening up again here in Ontario. And
Canada is doing very, very well. The numbers are dropping and we're always under 200 now cases, correct?
Yes, that's what I've heard.
Yeah, so doing well in Canada. How about America, the USA? Mackenzie, how are we doing in America with COVID-19?
Well, everybody has different viewpoints on that. But being here in the States, one thing I will say, things are pretty much open and back to normal. Last week, I went out to dinner with my mom and my brother, and, in restaurant dining is back open. So we were actually able to sit at a table inside a restaurant, which was pretty exciting.
Wow.
After months of being inside. Most retail stores are open, but it's interesting. You cannot try on clothes. Like all the fitting rooms are closed. So if you want to go shopping, you have to just buy whatever you want and then return it back if it doesn't fit. So the stores are being super flexible with that. But yeah, life is kind of back to normal here. I'm not hearing too much about case numbers. I think they are still going up in certain parts of the country, but at least here in Ohio, I think things are kind of phasing back to regular life. There were some new announcements about, new visa restrictions and things like that going on. I don't know all the details yet, but there are some changes to work visas. And there's kind of a lot of press going on about this, about the H-1B visas and the J-1 visas, which, are just, different visa designations. I've heard that these visa restrictions will not be affecting international students who are working, but I need to do some more research on that, so I'll keep you guys posted. But just don't be alarmed if you're hearing that news, because it's seeming like it's not going to affect international students.
So we'll definitely try to bring you up to date on that, and another podcast episode perhaps once we figure out what's going on. But obviously it's a lot of anti-President Trump sentiment, so they're slamming him. So there's a lot of negative press around that. But we'll have to see how it affects international students. But today we are talking about language learning tips and what you need to know before studying abroad. So I want to ask the ladies here. Lisa, let's start with you. What languages do you speak? How many do you speak?
Yeah, so since I'm German, I obviously speak German pretty well. My English is actually also completely fluent. Then I did my high school degree in German and in French. So my French is up to C1 level as well. And my Spanish, since I started last year, it's going más o menos. It's okay. I can keep conversations going, and I'm happy with my Spanish, but I'm still learning. So
wow.
I would call it 3.5.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. How about you, Mackenzie?
Well, so kind of like what Lisa said, I'm from the U.S., so obviously I speak English. I speak Spanish on the fluent level. And then kind of on a very, very basic, like I'm probably A1 or A2 level in both Portuguese and Hebrew. Hebrew, I'm like still actively trying to learn though. Portuguese, I just like learned it in college and just kind of throw out words here and there. But Hebrew is the one I'm actively trying to master right now.
Now, is that Brazilian Portuguese or Portugal Portuguese?
I learned Brazilian Portuguese.
Okay. So there is a difference, right?
I think so. I assume so. But it's complicated because it's so similar to Spanish. So I actually had like a really tough time with that. Yeah. Just the similarities.
You understand basically everything already from the Spanish and the words just mix up probably, right?
Exactly. It's like I can understand what they're saying to me in Portuguese, but to spit something out in Portuguese, it's like it just doesn't come out.
How about you, Lena? How about you, Lena, in Canada? English and French?
Yes, I do speak English and French fluently. I also speak Spanish fluently, and my native language is Arabic. So
wow.
That's fluently as well.
Okay. Fantastic. All right. So you guys have been studying English. You all know your English very, very well, or not English, but all the languages, I should say. You know many languages. So what is your advice? Let's start with Mackenzie. What is your advice to students thinking about going abroad and they're worried about their language skills?
Well, when you're going to go abroad to learn a new language, I think one of the biggest things to consider is the environment you're going to be in. So, for example, if you want to speak English, you should look at locations where you can kind of learn the accent you want to learn. If you go to the UK to learn English, you'll probably have like a nice little British accent there. If you go to the States, for example, be aware that different regions of the country have a different accent. So if you're down south, you're going to have a little twang. You'll be saying howdy, y'all.
Howdy, y'all.
But
every time I come out of Texas, I have the y'all tag. Every time I come back, you just pick up y'all. So how y'all doing? It is so amazing. Yeah, different regions are
keep that in mind.
New York and Boston, you've got the different accents. That's right. You get I go park the car and Harvard Yard.
Park the car.
Right. Yeah, then you go to Boston.
But in Ohio, for example, I didn't know this until I worked in international education, but apparently Ohio is a state where a lot of actors come to study because in Ohio we have a very neutral English accent. We really don't have an accent. So people from like Australia and from the UK, they'll come to Ohio to practice their American accent.
Wow.
So kind of interesting.
Yeah. Now, Lisa, what about if they're traveling to Europe, where maybe they're going to study abroad in France or Germany, where you've got a lot of different kind of cultures, different kind of languages there. What's your advice for those students?
Yeah, so what my general language tips would be, it counts for every language. For example, if you come to Germany or to France and you have not that much basic knowledge of the language before you arrive, the most important thing that I consider a deal breaker for learning a language is like to build friendships with people that already do speak the language, and just tell them to be slow and just tell them to address you in the language at all times, and just keep immersing and keep practicing and keep trying to talk. Even if you're going to make mistakes, it doesn't matter, but make connections with people speaking the language and just try to build from that.
Yeah, and it's very good advice. And my advice to you students is, how do you make friends with native speakers, whether you're in Germany, whether you're in France, whether you're in America? And the best way, of course, is if you have a hobby, join a club, join an activity where they're enjoying the same hobby as you. It could be sports. Maybe it's a soccer team. Join the soccer team and go from there. Yeah, Mackenzie, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, additionally, I mean, if you're going on a language program someplace else, you should consider staying with a host family, just because if you're staying with a host family, you're going to be forced to speak that language all the time. I mean, you're going to have to communicate about your most basic needs as far as like food and if you're not feeling well. So you're going to be hearing it all the time. You're going to be practicing all the time. And those host families are used to having international students. So they usually talk nice and slow and can kind of guide you through that process.
Yeah, and now let's talk about Canada, Lena, because in Canada, it is so multicultural, so diverse that when you land in Canada, you can hear your language everywhere. And what is your advice for students coming to Canada where they're going to run into people from Brazil or Spanish speakers? They're very easy to find, maybe more than other countries.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a plus actually for international students because they have this idea that I'm going to go somewhere, I can't speak with anyone, I don't know, the food that they're eating or whatever culture they have. And the thing about Canada, especially Ontario, I can say, it's very multicultural. You will see people from all over speaking all kinds of languages. And people, even who have lived here for a long time, still keep their accent. And it's not an embarrassing thing to have an accent. It's like showing your culture, like where you're from. It's something to be proud of, and to keep your native language and then speak English on top of that. That's very valuable here in Canada.
Yeah, one of the great things that I always tell students who travel to Canada is that when you arrive in Canada, they think you are Canadian. So they treat you like a Canadian, good or bad. You're going to get the real kind of experience. If I go to Asia, Japan, or China, or someplace like that, they know I'm not going to speak the language. But they don't know that in Canada. They know you. They think you are Canadian. Yeah, Lena.
Yeah, exactly. Because I was thinking about that. Like, there's not a stereotypical, like, Canadian, what a Canadian looks like. Like, you will see people who look completely different and they'll just identify as Canadian. And you'll be like, what does a Canadian look like? There's no, like, direct, like, description or appearance of a Canadian person. It could be, like, anyone.
For Germans, there's such a specific picture coming to everyone's mind, so I'm kind of jealous of that.
Same with the U.S. Like, I feel like I'm such a typical American stereotype.
But I think
when it comes to appearance,
in the U.S., you have centers like New York and L.A. that are so culturally diverse. That people will not necessarily treat you differently, but I think in other pockets of the U.S., you would maybe stand out a bit. In Ohio,
for sure. And that's why I mentioned with my tip, like, if you're thinking of studying a language in the U.S., like, be very aware of the region that you're choosing, just because of that. Like if you are in the middle of the country, chances are, you're gonna be different. You're gonna look different. People might not be used to having someone from another country close by. And that's not always a bad thing. It doesn't mean people are going to mistreat you or judge you. If anything, you'll just have a very immersive experience and you'll definitely make friends and you'll definitely have to speak English. But if you go to places like LA or New York City, or Miami, if you're from a Spanish-speaking country, like if you go to Miami, you're probably going to struggle to find opportunities to speak English. Yeah. So really keep the region in mind when you're planning your travel.
Now, Lisa, you learned so many languages. How did you learn them all? How did you learn so many languages? Are you just one of those people that just pick up the language just immediately? Because I hate those people, by the way.
I'm so sorry to tell you that. I guess I have a kind of a talent for it, so I normally pick it up very easily. But I obviously also have some tips, and I also have to sit down and study. And what I love to do, this is like something that everyone probably will enjoy. I always look up the nicest music, the charts, the top 20 of the music released in the language or in the country. For example, I did that in Spotify for Mexico when I arrived. I listened to the top 50 up and down, up and down. I learned all the lyrics. I looked them up. I wrote them down even. I learned them and I sang the music. So I kind of tried to pick up the accent and to like get more fluent and speak faster and understand like new songs right away. That always helps me a lot. And I always keep notebooks. So whenever I discover a new slang word or like some expression that I like, or I don't know, just anything that someone said, I write it down because I really learn well by reading. So when I write it down myself and I read over it again, it will definitely stick to my memory. So I can always expand my vocabulary that way.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, fantastic. Music is always a big winner for students. Mackenzie, what have you got? How did you learn all of your languages?
Similar to Lisa, I mean, obviously I took classes. So when I learned Spanish, it was my major in college. So I had a lot of Spanish classes. I had my Portuguese classes in college.
Were you learning Spanish and Portuguese at the same time?
Yeah, well, luckily, when I was in high school, I started learning Spanish because in the US, you have to take 2 years of a foreign language. So I just got really lucky in high school, and I had a really amazing Spanish teacher. So I would say I was in like the C1 level of Spanish coming out of high school. So I was almost fluent. So I had a pretty good base. And when I was in college, a lot of my classes were more about like literature and, real specifics of the language, and with literature, poetry, that kind of thing. But yeah, I had simultaneous classes with, Spanish and Portuguese. So that was kind of tough. Just because I said before, the languages are super similar. So it was kind of confusing. And I would do this weird thing when I was in my Portuguese classes. So during those classes, the teacher would obviously speak to us in English when she would explain, grammar or whatever. She would explain it in English, but I would read the Portuguese sentence or hear the Portuguese sentence. I would translate it in my head into Spanish and then make sense of that into English. So I was doing this like 3-way translation during the whole Portuguese class, and I would be like mentally exhausted when I would leave those classes.
That happened to me with my French. I have to be honest. That happened when I arrived here in Mexico. My French was always messing it up, and now it's the other way around. Now my Spanish is always interfering the French because it's more present right now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
Hebrew, though.
How does your mind even do that? Why?
Crazy. Hebrew is like a whole nother story though. Like Hebrew has nothing to do with Spanish or English. So that's when we're like, it's just repetition, like repetition. Like Lisa said, I have notebooks, and with Hebrew, it's a different alphabet and the characters are different. So the first step, like before I even really knew the alphabet, first I was trying to like learn the sounds, and I was trying to learn how to write the letters, and I would have to write them over and over and over again. But I think that works with a lot of languages too, just kind of that repetition. Like for Spanish, I used to, if we had a new vocabulary list, I would write the word in English down the left-hand side of the paper, and then I'd write the word in Spanish on the right-hand side, and I would keep folding the paper so I wouldn't be able to see the Spanish word, and I'd have to go back down the list for memory and like, okay, what's the Spanish verb for to be, to eat, whatever it may be, and I just would do that until I filled up the whole paper. So yeah, repetition's helpful.
Lena, now I'm curious, did you learn English growing up, or were you learning Arabic and then you learned English? What was first? Because I mean, Arabic is such a tough language.
Yes, so I'm born in Egypt, and the native language there is Arabic. So just it was my first language, as well as French, because my family spoke French, and I went to school in French. So my first language was like both of them, French and Arabic. As soon as I could start speaking, I spoke both of them. And then I immigrated to Canada when I was 9 years old. I didn't speak any English. I understood a little bit just from like cartoons. And I went to French school, so I didn't have like English courses, and it wasn't that difficult for me because I already spoke French. But one thing one of my high school teachers said here about learning English when you immigrate to Canada is like you catch it like a cold. Like you don't have to learn it because everyone around you speaks English. Everything is in English. So you don't even have to like do that much effort because you're in an environment where everything is in that language. And that's how I learned it. And I was in grade 4 when I came to Canada, and I took English classes alongside all of my classmates whose first language was English. So they didn't treat me like ESL. They didn't give me extra help. I just had to kind of like figure it out. And cartoons helped me.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Did you have any trouble in terms of writing? Because, Arabic style writing is totally different from English style writing or French style writing.
Yeah, Arabic writing, I would take private classes when I was in Egypt and in my first few years here in Canada, because I didn't write or read Arabic at all, because everything was either in French or English. And the letters I knew because I had learned the letters in French, and they're very similar to English. But Arabic, I still struggle with reading and writing because, I mean, it's so complicated. There's like 2 different S's, there's 2 different T's, depending on how you like shape your mouth or pronounce it. And it's so complicated. Like even till this day, I struggle with reading and writing Arabic.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one. All right. So final thoughts, ladies, any final thoughts out there? Any final pieces of advice for those who are a little worried? Mackenzie.
Yeah, so do not be afraid to make mistakes when you're learning a new language. It's normal. I have a really embarrassing story to share just to kind of wrap up, just to kind of make you feel better. And I tell this story all the time, but I still think it's funny. It was not funny at the time, though. So when I was trying to master Spanish and I was on my study abroad in Mexico for the first time, I was hanging out with friends. I was at a pool party and I was the only like non-native Spanish speaker there. So it was like the first time I was fully immersed and didn't have anybody around me who spoke English. And we were all ordering sushi for dinner, like ordering sushi over the phone. And first of all, at that point, I was not like a big sushi eater, so I didn't really know what anything meant. I wouldn't even know it in English. But I was trying to communicate that I just wanted something that had crab in it. And in Spanish, the word for crab is cangrejo. And when I was telling them I wanted, a roll that had cangrejo or crab in it, I accidentally said I wanted a sushi roll with conejo, which is the word for bunny. So I ordered some bunny rabbit sushi.
Wow. You get bunny rabbit sushi?
Bunny rabbit sushi.
Wow. That is a new delicacy. Absolutely.
Yeah. Right. Everyone laughed. I was very embarrassed. But it happens, and I learned, and now I'll never forget the word for crab.
No. This is forever engraved in your mind.
That's right. When you make those mistakes, they remain with you forever, and you will never learn. And people will ask you, "Why do you know that word?" And you can tell them that funny story. Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Mackenzie, for your insights into language learning. And don't forget to tune in every Friday for Study Abroad Tips, brought to you by ApplyWave.com.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to visit ApplyWave.com. Study abroad, smart and simple with ApplyWave.